War is hell. It reaches every hand, from the soldier in the trench to the nurse at his side, from the engineer forging weapons to the families left behind. These are their stories. This is World War I Stories, Tales Beyond the Trenches. Today's episode, Hub City. The stillness of the house brought him no comfort this April morning. Only yesterday, the newspaper's evening edition had proclaimed that President Wilson, after days of debate, had signed a declaration of war. 5 days earlier, he had stood before Congress urging America to join the fight. He heard a mouse scurrying somewhere in the room, but he did not care. There was too much on his mind this morning. Upstairs, his wife and 2 children slept peacefully. He had tried to hide the gravity of the situation from Helena, his wife, but eventually she would have to come to grips with it. He was Henry Barnhart, born right here in Hagerstown, Maryland. His father had once been Frederick Barnhart in Germany, but had become Frederick Barnhart when he settled in the United States in 1868. His mother, Helga, had been pregnant during their long journey across the Atlantic. Henry was born only 2 weeks after they arrived in Washington County. If he had been born in the old country, he would have been named Heinrich, but here in Maryland, he was Henry. Now, the United States, his home, was at war with Germany, the place where his family story began. Washington County, and Hagerstown in particular, were heavily populated with German Americans, men and women, proud to live in the United States. But how were those that were not German view them now? He had grown up in the shadow of a great civil war that had nearly torn the United States apart. In Maryland, a state caught between North and South, he had learned early to recognize the wary glances, the guarded words exchanged between neighbors whose loyalties had once been divided. Even years later, he could still hear the muttered insults, the unspoken suspicions that lingered just beneath the surface. If that was how Americans treated each other, simply for having stood on opposite sides of a war, how would they look at men like him now, whose roots stretched all the way back to their current enemy, Germany? He stood from the table and looked around the house. It was fairly large for normal standards. The home, built in 1905, stood on Summer Street, and from the back of the home, just behind the carriage house, he could look down the hill and see the Western Maryland Railway Station. Being the depot master at the station had afforded him this life, and he cherished it. He grabbed his jacket and walked out the door. The dawn sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon, casting a soft orange glow across the sky. Down the hill, he could see the trains lined up at the depot, their engines already awake. Smoke billowed from the stacks, thick and dark, rising against the morning light. The black plumes stood out sharply against the orange on the horizon, then faded as they drifted upwards and were swallowed by the lingering darkness. It was a brisk morning, and today he felt like walking, so he would. The depot was dark when he arrived. He had to feel along the wall for the switch that would turn on the lights. This was every morning. He pressed the top of the 2 buttons next to the door. The lights began to hum. Now he could see where he was going. He did not know it yet, but today would be the busiest day he had ever experienced. He was exhausted when he arrived home that evening. He could smell the potatoes and the roast before he even entered the back door of the home. When he entered, Helena stood near the table. She had been placing plates, cups, and silverware into their proper places. "Well, there he is. Late day, I see." She was not upset, she just liked to needle him at times. This was by far one of the craziest days I have ever seen. He crossed the room and hugged her from behind. She leaned into the hug, and he enjoyed that. On normal days, he was home about an hour before dinner would be served. He usually had time to sit in the living room reading the newspaper in his favorite chair. But today he had indeed ran late, so he was here just in time. Did it have anything to do with the news yesterday? She asked. This took him by surprise. She rarely took any interest in the news. She never read the paper. You know about that? He asked. She turned around to face him, her arms wrapped around his neck. I do. You were so distant last evening, so I read your paper this morning. So you understand what is happening? He asked her. I know that we've declared war against Germany, but I'm not sure why it affected you last evening. It's not like you're young enough to go to war, and little Henry and Frederick are too young. It doesn't really affect us. Helena had been born in Frederick, Maryland, a mere 30 miles from Hagerstown. He had been a ticket agent in those days, and they had met when she arrived in Hagerstown to take a train to St. Louis for a family vacation. The two had exchanged looks, and 3 weeks later, when she returned, she sought him out. It was not common for a woman to approach a man, but she was no normal woman. She was upfront and sometimes abrasive. She knew what she wanted, and she had made the first move. He looked into her eyes and smiled at her. Sit a moment. Allow me to explain. She turned back toward the table as he moved to pull a chair out for her. She sat, and he did likewise in an adjacent chair. I'm not worried about me having to go fight, or even the boys, he began. Then what is it? She interrupted. I'm worried about how people will respond to us, he continued. I'm not following. We're German. You know this. My parents came from the old country, as did your grandparents, he explained. Do you think we're in some sort of danger, Henry? She asked. Her voice was starting to echo the concerns he felt. Not danger, no. But I feel it may get a little uncomfortable here for us and for the boys. He had not considered how the boys would fare at school with their friends. Not until he had said it now. He pressed on. Some people might start to think that those of us who are German might be spies or enemies. That's ridiculous, she started. We were born here. We're Americans that happen to have German family. That may be so, but we are German nonetheless. Just keep it all in mind if you start getting sideways glances while you're at the market. I choose not to believe that the people who know us would start to think of us as the enemy. At least, not in this town. You're the depot master. Everyone knows you. Everyone knows you're loyal to the United States. She stood up from the table. As am I. She paused for a moment and put her hand on his shoulder. Go wash up for dinner. You're worried for nothing. He tapped her hand with his. Maybe you're right. And he stood as well. He didn't have the heart to tell her how the Canadians were treating their German citizens. He had overseen the loading of railcar passengers over 1,000 times in his 5 years as a depot master. Lately, however, 2 of every 3 passenger railcars were stocked with men in uniform. It had been normal now for the last few weeks since war had been declared. Every day, as he watched the young-faced soldiers climbing aboard with their packs and rifles, he was surprised at how many names he knew. He realized just how many of these boys he had watched grow up. Boys who once ran barefoot past his station, who now marched with their chins held high and their hair freshly trimmed. He watched Alexander Miller along with his brother William, 2 young men apprenticing with the local blacksmith. They were part of the stubborn crowd who did not truly believe that motor cars were the wave of the future, still trusting in the strength of iron and the shape of a horseshoe. He saw Elliot Wilson, a wiry youngster who delivered groceries to half the families in town. Henry remembered how Elliot used to whistle as he darted between the depot doors balancing crates twice his size. He saw Jonathan Carney, the pride of the local baseball diamond, now just another soldier in a sea of khakis. His bat had been traded for a rifle, his easy smile replaced by a look of determined uncertainty. It seemed like every day he watched some young man that he knew board the train. He wondered often if they would ever return. Today, he stood on the platform, once again watching the 1 p.m. train to Baltimore load. He held the schedule in his hand. There would be three more trains today, but this was the last that would carry passengers. The rest would carry freight. He looked to see wagons and motor cars lining up along the nearby road. Many people lined up early to unload onto the trains. It would be his job to verify each load with the manifest and give the go ahead for the items to be loaded. But that would be a little later. First, this passenger train would have to depart, and the freight train would have to arrive. He glossed over the list on his clipboard, and then his vision shifted again to the line of men boarding the train. There was nobody familiar this time. This was odd. Then he saw the patch. They were a Pennsylvania regiment, probably from nearby Greencastle or Chambersburg, two small towns just across the border to the north. He heard a voice from behind him. "Good morning, Henry." He turned to see the division superintendent, Jeremiah Johnson, the man who was charged with making sure that all of the Maryland stations outside of Baltimore ran smoothly. "Superintendent Johnson, why, it's nice to see you," Henry said, trying to hide the shock he felt at the man's sudden presence. "Do you have a minute to talk?" Superintendent Johnson was a tall man, college educated, and younger than him. Henry felt rather intimidated by his presence. This was a man who could make or break a career with a stroke of a pen. Of course I do, sir. My office? Sounds good. Please meet me there in 5 minutes. I see you have departures and I don't want to keep you from your job." Henry looked down at the clipboard again and then back at the superintendent. "Yes, sir. I'll be there in 5." His thoughts swirled now. Why was the superintendent here? It was not time for the yearly review. That would happen in September. It was only early May. Furthermore, there was no communication that he was coming, and there had always been notice of some sort. He never just popped in like this. The final passenger left the station, and he made his way to the small, cramped office where he had a table that served as his desk. The superintendent sat behind the table, in the chair Henry usually occupied. There were no other chairs, so Henry stood just inside the doorway. "I'm here, sir." "How are you doing, Barnhart?" Johnson asked. "I'm good. Thank you for asking, sir." Johnson sat back in the chair. It creaked. "And the family?" "Helen is good. Little Henry and Andrew are doing well also. Little Henry's chomping at the bit to come join us here. He's close. He's 15 now, be 16 in a month." Henry was always proud of his sons. Little Henry was structured and intelligent, whereas Andrew was a prolific athlete. He played second base for the local baseball team, which was quite an accomplishment for a child of 14. Johnson smiled and gave him a nod. "Henry, go to the lobby and find a chair. You standing there makes it seem like I'm about to fire you." Henry did what he was told. He found a chair and dragged it into the small room. He took a seat across from Johnson. Nervously, Henry fidgeted in a chair. "It's good to see you, sir. A little surprising, though." Johnson nodded again. "Well, this is not a comfortable visit, Henry." "Am I being fired, sir? Have I done something wrong?" His head shaking this time, Johnson smiled. "No, nothing like that. Where did your family originate?" Surprised at the question, Henry had to play it back in his head to make sure he got it right. "Sir, I know that you were born here in Hagerstown, but what about your father?" Johnson asked. "My father was born in Frankfurt. My grandfather brought him here when he was all of 12, sir. Why do you ask?" He was very curious now. "Germany. That's what I feared," Johnson returned. Henry had feared this too. He feared that his German ancestry would be an issue, especially since he held such an important position within the railroad. The depot master knew everything that went on in a station, the comings and goings of trains, the cargo, the repair schedule, and much more. It was a position of profound trust. Was he about to lose it because he was German? "Sir, what is going on?" Henry asked. Johnson bored in. "Well, there's no real easy way to ask this, but I feel I must. Is there any way that you can hide that you're German? Maybe say that you're Dutch instead? You do good work here. And the last thing I want to do is demote you and find a new depot master. I feel we can get around that if you just hide your nationality." Henry was floored. He thought of his home where he and his family often dined on traditional German fare, such as sauerbraten with tangy red cabbage, spatzel dumplings, and thick slices of rye bread slathered with sweet butter. They had German trinkets placed around the home. They attended a German speaking church. Many people knew that he was German. How was he to hide it? That's a very interesting request, sir. May I ask why you're bringing it up? Henry asked. Johnson stood now and turned sideways. It's simple, really. We are at war with Germany. The federal government is wary of having Germans in such a position as a depot master. As you know, it's an important position, a position with a good amount of knowledge, especially regarding cargo. And in a town such as Hagerstown, well, it's a major hub. They don't call it Hub City for nothing. He turned towards Henry. Besides, the people who know you're German can continue to know you're German. But if anyone new asks you, you simply tell them that you and your family are Dutch. I trust you not to be a spy or a saboteur. It's still quite a big thing you're asking of me, sir. I know it is. But keep in mind, it's temporary. Once this war is over, then you can go back to the status quo. I had to run the idea to those above me, and they agreed that as long as you hide your nationality, then we don't have to demote you, Johnson explained. It is what's best for all of us. He felt like he was between a rock and a hard place. He was proud of his German ancestry, but on the other hand, he loved his position as depot master. Helena was also proud of her nationality. Would she understand if he said yes to this? Sure, it was temporary, but what if the war never ended? And then there were the boys. Could they keep up the charade? They had been raised in a household that celebrated their heritage. They had been taught German at an early age, and quite often they spoke the language at home. I think we can do that, but I feel like I should talk to Helena. I need an answer now, Henry, Johnson replied. Impulsively, Henry hung his head low and agreed. Helena had been hard to convince, but she had done as he asked. There would be no more schnitzels or any other ethnically German foods. She could not be seen buying the ingredients at the grocery. All of the trinkets that had celebrated their heritage had been carefully boxed up and stored in the attic of their home. This evening, he sat at the table with Helena, the electric light emitting a soft hum above them. They had just finished their evening meal, so now it was time for Henry to read the evening paper and for Helena to work on her needlework. It was a routine they had settled in lately. The boys had gone outside to be with friends, something they did often after the evening meal. They should be home soon. There was a light knock on the back door. Who could that be? Henry asked, mostly to himself. Helena had already risen from her chair, laid her needlework aside, and was heading for the door. I'm not sure. It's 7 at night. We don't get visitors this late. Standing in the doorway when she opened it, Henry could see one of little Henry's friends, Frederick Bauer. Frederick, is everything okay? She asked the boy. Frederick and little Henry had known each other since grammar school, and they were very close. Frederick's family, much like theirs, had changed the spelling of their last name of Bauer from the traditional spelling with the U to an Americanized version with an OW. But, like much of the Hagerstown population, it was well known that they were German. Frederick was out of breath when he spoke. I was told to come get Mr. Barnhart. Henry stood and walked towards the door. Why? What's wrong? Just come, please. My father is asking for you, Frederick pleaded. Henry retreated to get his coat, kissed Helena on the cheek, and followed the teenager out the door. The Bowers lived just a block away, and he could see the issue as soon as the small house came into sight. In big red painted letters, someone had written the words, Death to the Huns, and Get out now. There were broken windows, and even wood from the front banister and the porch had been splintered. There was a small crowd in the street, all of them looking at the home and what had been done. Henry and Frederick approached. In the crowd, he could see Frederick's parents, Conrad and Rosa Bauer. He made his way to them. Henry and Conrad had known each other since their school days. Rosa was not German, but Scottish. Conrad worked at the local bank. Henry addressed him first. Conrad, what's happened here? Rosa was crying in his arms. Conrad looked up. Look at my house. Look at what they've done to my beautiful home. It was then, as he looked past the damaged porch and the graffiti's messages, he saw that through the window a German flag hung on the wall. Fall had moved through quickly, and winter was beginning its descent onto the hamlet. Henry had now overseen hundreds, if not thousands, of troops from his train platform, not to mention the supplies that had flooded in from across the country. Hagerstown, being located where it was one of the busiest hubs in the country, thus earning the nickname Hub City. Oftentimes, he thought of that night 4 months ago when the Bowers' home was vandalized. He could not help but come to the conclusion that the flag he had seen through the window was the reason the home was targeted. Conrad Bauer had shown no intention of hiding his heritage no matter what the cost. Now, the Bowers had moved to Baltimore. Henry hoped they were having luck there. Little Henry and Andrew each handled the situation differently. Whereas Andrew shrugged it off and had muttered an I told you so about the visible flag, little Henry had seethed with anger. What had that flag mattered? The Bowers were just as loyal to the United States as anyone else. Today, more troops were arriving. Like usual, they had lined up along the platform. Like usual, he scanned their faces. Yes, there were a few men that he knew, ones that waited a while before volunteering. Nationalism was reaching a fever pitch, and it had finally hit Hagerstown. He felt that this train would have no room for civilian passengers at all. This was the first time that had happened since the United States entered the war. There were two sets of tracks that led into the platform, one for each direction. The tracks ran adjacent to each other and merged into a single set of tracks at the platform only to divide again afterwards. All of this was controlled by a switchman who could divert the trains from one set of tracks to another. Today, a train was unloading cargo at the platform. Soon it would continue its journey west. Another train had come from the west and was waiting on the adjacent tracks. That was a train that would take these men to Baltimore, the first leg on their trip to France. A man stepped towards him with a box. Are you the depot master? The man asked. I am, Henry responded. I was told that this had to come directly to you. There are instructions for what to do next. The man handed him a small wooden box about 1 foot square. The box itself looked as if it had just been made. There was no dirt, no staining. It was pristine. By the time Henry set the box down, the man was gone. Henry could see his backside reboarding the train. He looked at the note. Personal effects of Elliot Wilson. Remit to Wilson residence at 208 Summer Street, Hagerstown, Maryland. He glanced down at the box again. There was a small clasp holding it shut. He bent down and opened it. Inside, there was a small round piece of metal on a chain, a pair of socks, a notebook, and a notice. He picked up the small metal disc. It had writing on it. It was Elliot's name and ID number. He lifted the notice and read it. A tear formed in his eye. This box and this notice would be all Elliot's parents would receive of their son. The notice felt cold and distant, as if it was written bureaucratically. It said nothing of his cause of death, just that he was interred somewhere in France. He folded the notice, placed it back in the box, and closed the lid. As the train pulled away, his thoughts lie with the many times that he watched Elliot deliver groceries up and down their street. Oddly enough, he had not known that Elliot lived on the same street he did, just a few blocks away. Helena would be devastated by this news. He broke from the trance in time to see the troop train pull in from the west and the men start to pile on. He consulted his clipboard and schedule. Everything was right on time. After this train left, he would be going home, but along the way, he would deliver this box to the Wilson house. That would be a tough moment, he knew. This was the first casualty for Hagerstown. Half an hour later, the troop train was loaded. He heard a voice screaming, "Stop that train! Henry, stop that train!" He looked around for the source of the voice. It was a woman's. He knew that. But it was shrill, panicky. It bellowed again. "Henry, stop that damn train! Do not let it go!" Finally, he found the source of the voice. It was Helena and Andrew, and they were frantically running towards him down the platform. As she got closer, he could see the panic in her face and the tears flowing from her eyes. She was to him now, hitting his chest and repeating over and over for him to stop the train. His mind was frazzled. What was happening? "Helena, what's wrong?" he asked her as he grabbed her shoulders. "You can't let him go. You must get him off that train." Still confused, he asked, "Who? What are you talking about?" Then he looked at the train. It was pulling away. Many men were sticking their heads out of the windows and waving. But one looked familiar. How had he missed this? "Henry, what are you doing?" he screamed towards his son as he started to run towards the train. "I have to prove to them that we are loyal, father, that we are as good as any Americans," his son yelled back. Then he yelled, "I'm sorry, Mom. I'll be okay." And he ducked his head back into the train car and disappeared. Henry turned towards his wife, who was now on her knees crying uncontrollably and being comforted by Andrew. "My son is gone," she wailed.
You've been listening to World War I Stories, Tales Beyond the Trenches, where history comes alive through the lives of those who lived it. If this episode moved you, please share it, follow, and leave a rating. Help keep these stories alive. Want to hold these stories in your hand? Explore the books inspired by them, available now on Kindle and in paperback.